Dr. Vincent Miles is a licensed clinical psychologist in private practice with over 2 decades of experience in clinical, business, and professional settings. He owns and operates his mental health clinic, Miles Psychology Services, and is now launching a consulting arm of his professional practice, focusing on the needs of businesses and young leaders. Human Factor Leadership. It aims to help close an observed gap in workforce-ready leadership, assist businesses in strengthening strategies, and helping cross-sector collaborative effort. Human Factor Leadership also has a stated goal to assist in improving diversity and opportunity within both nonprofit and for-profit organizations, bringing science, effective methods, and human behavior to the forefront of business design. Human Factor Leadership is a leader in understanding the human factor in all that you do and all that you can be, and the businesses that you lead. Dr. Miles is described as a kind and compassionate psychologist that enjoys working with individuals to support incremental change, promoting growth, and strengthening coping skills and strategies that allow for optimal function. He is rooted in community and in his free time enjoys activities with his wife and young son. Also tinkering, exploring, and finding humor in life, Dr. Miles strives for a life of authenticity and connectedness. Dr. Miles holds both a master's and doctoral degrees in clinical psychology and has many academic honors. He is an adjunct professor, a national speaker on issues pertaining to mental health, and was recently selected for Minnesota Young American Leaders Program, also known as the MYALP, a Harvard-backed intensive leadership training that promotes cross-sector collaboration and critical problem solving. Dr. Miles also serves his community. Inspired by his son, he serves as a board member for an emerging children's museum and works tirelessly as the chair of their exhibits committee, overseeing the design, development, and fabrication of the museum's exhibits, and is dedicated to implementing a unique visitor experience that keeps the communities, families, and the employees central to the experience. Since 2020, the Children's Museum has raised over $17 million in capital and has broken ground and is slated to open Minnesota's second largest children's museum in spring of 2025. This has been a passion project for Dr. Miles and has allowed further redefinement of his overall organization and human-centered skill set. Please put your hands together and welcome Dr. Miles to the show. Dr. Miles, you there, man?
I am here.
Hey, Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you too.
Dude, your bio is impressive, man. I'm like, good. That is awesome.
Thank you, and I appreciate the introduction.
But listen, you wrote it. It is all you. Everything you've accomplished, everything that you're doing. I can't wait to dig into this, man. So once again, Happy New Year. Welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to dig into.
That is awesome. So listen, Doc, let's start out with who are you personally, man? Introduce yourself to the rest of the world so we can kind of dig into your background and kind of vibe with you.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you again for having me. I'm Dr. Vincent Miles. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm actually located up here in Minnesota, and I told you I'd keep you up to date on the weather. It's 4 degrees today, so
I don't know how you do it.
Yep. So I'm up here in Minnesota, and my backstory is more or less that I've got family kind of all over, but I've got family down in Baton Rouge. I've got family down in Texas. My mom is originally from Minnesota, and so we kind of moved around. I was born in Nebraska and then moved back up to Minnesota with my mom. And so just kind of shout out to all the family that's around, but Minnesota is home for me right now.
So would you call yourself more of a Midwest guy then? Because it sounds
yeah, upper Midwest.
All right, so I know you got family down south. You got, you said in Nebraska. Now you kind of settled in Minnesota. So who you rooting for, man? You got a football team you go for?
Oh yeah, well, Vikings all the way.
All right. I'm not gonna hold it against you. They had Kirk Cousins. I like Kirk Cousins, right? Not sure about the rest of the team, but
They had Kirk Cousins. We got rid of him.
I know. So that's you personally. What about professionally? In your bio it says you're a doctor, psychology. So yeah, explore it.
Yep. So I'm a psychologist. I'm in private practice. I've been in private practice for about a decade now. So my journey through that process, I have both my undergrad at St. Cloud State University, so here in Minnesota. And then I went over to Chicago, got both my master's and my doctorate in clinical psychology at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. Spent about 4 or 5 years there, and then kind of made the slow kind of weaving journey back to Minnesota, where I started doing more of the clinical work. My background and my specialization is actually in health psychology. Health psychology is a small little kind of offshoot of clinical psychology, and the main focus there is any kind of underlying health issue and how that impacts wellness, how that impacts mental health, how that impacts the overall functioning of the individual. So an example would be chronic pain. That's one of those areas I do a lot of work in. So if somebody is dealing with chronic pain or even just chronic health issues, what's often likely to develop is some type of depression or anxiety. And so my job is to kind of go in there and work with them a little bit to make sure that they're coping and dealing with not only the depression and anxiety, but the health issues that are kind of weighing on them and kind of overlying whatever else is going on for them. And so I did that work primarily in a pain clinic for about 3 years. And then at that point in time, I said, you know what? I want to jump into the private practice world. I want a little more control in my life. And so what that allowed me to do was diversify. I was able to kind of go and say, you know what, I want to do some work in pain, chronic pain. I want to do some work in general kind of management of health issues and kind of that health psychology umbrella. But then I also want to do general counseling. I want to be able to kind of have a diverse set of clients, diverse set of issues, and really make sure that I'm able to kind of make sure each day is a little bit different for me.
That is interesting because, I mean, I guess from an outside looking in, right? When I think of psychology, again, I'm thinking I'm sitting somewhere on a couch. I don't know if there's like therapy, if those two are intertwined, if it means the same, but I feel like from an outside looking in, I'm just thinking I'm going to relieve and talk to somebody about some of the stuff that's on my mind. But what you're sharing with me, the part that you really focus on is that health piece, which is I can come to you with back issues. And now you can help me understand how this is clouding my judgment, my memory, the way I function on a day-to-day basis so I can move forward, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. So let me ask you this because I got a follow-up question. I got to know, what's the most, I guess, the biggest chronic issue that you kind of talk through with people the most?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest one right now that I'm dealing with is health issues stemming from kind of obesity, being overweight. So we have the sequela of cardiovascular issues. We have the issues of diabetes. We have issues of low back pain. And a lot of that can be tied directly to weight. And so a lot of times what we focus on is how do we get you active again? How do we make sure that you're moving? How do we make sure that you're communicating with your providers? If you're doing physical therapy, how do we keep you motivated so that, it's a hard journey to do physical therapy, but it's a necessary step. We got to get you flexible. We got to get you moving. We got to get your muscles working again. And so I do a lot of work, especially in the pain side, kind of just coaching and encouraging them to kind of keep that motivation as high as possible. And then, beyond that, we came out of the pandemic. I had a lot of different clients that were dealing with specific health issues that made them more susceptible to COVID-19 and just kind of that overlying risk that was there. And so trying to get them to kind of navigate a world that was scary to them, in some ways, there's this fear, if I go to the grocery store, am I going to become so sick that I die or that it lays me up for months? Well, we don't know the answer to that. And we didn't know the answer to that at the beginning of the epidemic. And so journeying through that process, the anxiety was through the roof for a lot of my medical clients. And then getting them back into just their normal kind of day-to-day life. How do we transition back? How do we get you back into the office? How do we get you back working again? How do we get you back around people and feeling comfortable? So there was a lot of that kind of how do we cope? How do we just deal with, we know that there's stuff going on in the world and we know that it's high stress, but we still got to we got to manage. We got to figure out how to get through.
Oh, I love this, man. I really, really do love this. Hey, listen, I want to explore more of this, but before we get to that, I just kind of want to back up. Let's backtrack a little bit because listen, there's a lot of people that's going to be tuning in into this podcast and they've probably aspired or maybe you even inspire them to want to seek becoming that path from a clinical psychology standpoint, right? So I want to go back into really understanding your hustle journey. How did you become Dr. Miles today? Help us through some of those setbacks, those challenges, because you and I know there's never a straight path to success. Oftentimes you gotta, you're tiptoeing in dark corners, you know what I'm saying? You're knocking over trash cans. You're borrowing from family members, whatever. You're sleeping on people's couch. You're just out there hustling, right, to get to where you are today. So help us really understand, man, some of your journey to get to where you are today.
Definitely, and I'll dive into that and give you all of the background and success and pitfalls that I went through. But before I do that, I always like to shout out just the family that has struggled before me. I think that's an important thing to recognize. We are all kind of in some ways standing on the shoulders of our parents, our own lineage, our own line. And so the legs up that they were able to give us, even if they were small, they were significant. And so that is something that their struggle is part of our story. And then, thinking about myself, I grew up in a world where, I was in Minneapolis for a period of time. My parents kind of uprooted from the Minneapolis area out into kind of a rural central Minnesota area. I identify as Black, and being one of the only Black people in that community, that puts a target on your back in different ways. And so it is kind of this uphill climb that I remember going through, just going through grade school, going through high school, trying to figure out just my place, and not really even always feeling like I had a place. Being biracial, being light-skinned, it doesn't necessarily always feel like you fit into a community perfectly, even if you should. It just doesn't.
The Alpha Shore didn't work for you, man. Come on.
Yeah. So finding that way just through that process, that ultimately kind of led me, to that idea of like, I'm getting out of here. I'm going to college.
Right.
Jump into undergrad. I don't know quite what I'm going to do yet, but I had some family that had kind of more of a medical background. And so I was very much fascinated by their stories. I remember all the dining room talk. I remember hearing the stories about, surgery and all these other things. And so I remember in the back of my mind saying, okay, you know what, maybe I'm going to go to med school. So I'm going to follow, biology. I'm going to do kind of a pre-med kind of path for how I'm going to start out. As I got in, that first semester or two, and it started to feel like, that whole medical school journey, I mean, that's for some people, and it's the right path for some people, but it felt super competitive. And, there was a part of that where I didn't really necessarily want to compete with people. I wanted to help people. And as I kind of reflected on that a little bit more, it kind of brought me to this place where I actually started exploring psychology as both my undergrad and as maybe a career path. And it wasn't something I had a lot of exposure to. Most people going through, grade school, high school, maybe you take one psychology course, or maybe it's just a part of some other course.
Sure.
But you don't really dive into that idea of like human behavior and change process, and how do you get people to cope with mental illness, or, what even is mental illness? You don't really explore that. And so it was really in college that I started to kind of explore that a little bit more. Took my, Psych 101, 102, 103, those lower level psychology courses. And I was like, okay, I'm feeling this. I'm a little more hooked. And so from that point forward, and I'd say this is maybe second year, got rid of that idea of pre-med, kind of said, you know what, psychology's it. I'm majoring in psychology, and I know that you can't really do anything with just an undergrad, bachelor's degree in psychology. It's not one of those kind of like terminal degrees where you can just go out and do something. You can't practice psychology. You can't do any of that with a bachelor's. And so I knew right away that meant for sure I'm going to grad school. I'm probably going to be getting my master's. And so as I started to approach that idea a little bit more, really the world kind of started to open up, and I was able to kind of see that path forward for me. And it meant it was meaningful. And I'll expand on that a little bit more. Before that, though, I want to explain one of the pitfalls. And this one I hold on to pretty close, because it's one of those, it feels embarrassing, but it also feels a little bit like that origin kind of piece of who I am, and kind of defining how I work with people, actually. So if I go back to my very first semester, brand new to college, no idea what to expect. You're already kind of settled into your schedule, your routine. You're kind of like, oh yeah, I got this. No big deal. I'm getting A's and all my stuff. It's, this is pretty easy. We get to finals week, and if anyone's been through undergrad, that finals week is, it's tough.
It is tough.
It puts you through that ringer, and in some ways turns everything upside down. You either do really well or you struggle in some ways. And for me, I was ready. I was absolutely ready for taking the final test. I was doing all this studying. I was all ready and all this stuff. But what I didn't realize was that my schedule changed during finals week. So here I am, cramming the night before, studying, doing everything I can, show up to my classroom to take my exam, and realize I'm there on the wrong day. I'm a day late for my final exam.
A whole day late.
A whole day late. And so in that moment, I'm like, oh man, everything's flashing before my eyes. I feel like I've just failed college. I'm at the start line and I just tripped. That's what it felt like. So I went to my professor, hat in hand, basically just like, you know what, I messed up. I had no idea that it was on a different day. And what I was met with by that professor, and I have, all the respect for this individual in the world, was this understanding. Mistakes happen. You're not going to be perfect in everything that you do. And you know what, if you own up to some of those mistakes, if you are willing to kind of just recognize that, I'm trying to do better, I'm trying to do good in life, and you approach it head on, this professor just said, hey, let's take that test right now. Let's get this taken care of. You're a good student. I know you are. So let's keep you. And I think back on that, all the way through grad school, I'm standing up on stage receiving my doctorate. And I'm thinking about that day, because honestly, it was one of those moments that if he had taken a different approach, if that professor had said, well, you just failed the class, I don't know if I would have been on that stage. I don't know if I would have been right there. And so sometimes, I think we kind of forget how impactful we can be moment by moment basis, treating somebody with kindness, treating somebody with respect, finding that way to kind of help them navigate a pathway forward. It doesn't always feel like, it's that impactful, but honestly, if you do the opposite, if you set them back or hurt them or in some way, contribute to the barrier that they're facing, you might really mess up their life. And so we have to be mindful of that sometimes.
Listen, Doc, you shared a lot there, and I just kind of want to go back a little bit, because there's a lot to go off of there. And I think one of the things that you had mentioned is, there were several different things. One was finding your place as a kid, right? Trying to figure out where to fit in. The other was you had a little bit of family connection to the medical world, so that kind of inspired you a little bit. But the big thing that you shared was the fact that you almost missed your whole, no, you didn't almost, you missed your whole final, right? And then you went back and asked for grace and had an opportunity to make it up. So my question to you is that, did you already have a relationship, like a really good relationship with this professor? And then the other thing, a follow-up question, were your grades already good? So he kind of gave you the benefit of the doubt.
I think he gave me a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, but I didn't have a close relationship with him yet. And that is one thing I did learn. As I went forward, having those good connections with professors, that does make a big difference. They want to know who you are, and they want to know whether you're trustworthy. But this was, at that moment in time, that was his decision to make. He could have just let me fail at that point and disappear.
Wow. Okay, so I gotta ask, what if it didn't happen, if he didn't allow you to move forward, if you can think back, what do you think you actually would have became then in that event?
That's a great question. I have no idea. I try not to think too much about the course that could have happened, but I do know that, I probably would have persevered. I probably would have found my way through college, but at the same time, I don't know that it would have been that smooth of a path. I think in my brain, that self-doubt would have started to kind of come in, maybe medical school, maybe, going on to grad school, maybe all of that stuff just isn't for me. So maybe I just need to focus on getting a job now, figuring out what I should do, what I can do with the least amount of kind of resistance possible.
That makes me think about, I know there's a lot of people who spend a lot of time looking back on their life, and oftentimes it prevents them from moving forward. So as a clinical physician, man, what do you tell people to cope and move forward through that path?
Yeah, one thing I often focus on with my clients, our brain does like to go back in time and kind of think about the past. Right. But we can't change things that happened there. And so one of the things that creates is a little bit of this breeding ground for depression. The what ifs, those missed opportunities, those things that I failed at. If we dwell on them for too long, our mood tanks. And so what I encourage people to do is, we have to learn from the past. We have to be able to kind of take away certain lessons, certain messages. And those are the pieces that I encourage people to hold on to. And you can reflect on those. What did I learn? How did I grow? But that's going to empower you to apply that into the future. And that's really where we have to make sure that we are staying present. We're making decisions now based on information that we have now, skills or resources that we have available to us. And so I get a lot of people to kind of refocus that a little bit more instead of dwelling or kind of getting stuck in the past too much.
Yeah, of course, it's already been stated, you're a clinical psychologist, but you're also there's that entrepreneurial piece. So you were sharing that 3 years in, you was working for an organization, you decided to open up your own practice, which is interesting because now it pivots you and puts you in entrepreneurial state. Where now you got to run a whole business, and there's best practices and SOPs. Maybe even there's, virtual assistants or employees and things like that. And one of the words that you said that I picked up on was control. Moving and pivoting like this to become an entrepreneur allows you to control more aspects of your life. Can you tap on that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad you picked up on that word. Yeah. I think a lot of people who start their own businesses, they frame it often of, I want to be my own boss.
Right.
But what does that really mean? And for me, what that really meant was I wanted to be able to be in control of the yeses and the nos, the directions that I head into, and where I spend my time and where I spend that energy. And so that was one thing in the clinical world. I didn't feel, when I worked in a clinic, I didn't feel like I had that level of control. I had decisions to make, and I had, individual clients that I could kind of help and focus on. But the bigger picture, I never really got to focus on. So when I jumped into private practice, it was kind of, the motivation was twofold. First of all, like I mentioned, I want to diversify. I want to be able to work with different clients and not necessarily feel like I'm seeing one type of client over and over again.
Yeah.
The second piece to it was that I also really wanted to make sure that I was spending my time in ways that were engaging and kind of rewarding for me. I love my clinical work. I love helping people, and I love kind of, helping them change things that they need to change in their own life or cope with things. But one of the other kind of big motivations for me is that I also like to explore and dabble and create and have just different outlets all the time. And so that has really kind of been one of those pieces that's kind of carried with me in the last 10 years in private practice, is really this idea that what's that other outlet? When I first started my private practice, I got that up and running, and then I decided I wanted to kind of try to be an adjunct professor for a while. And so I reconnected with my alma mater, St. Cloud State, and became an adjunct professor there, taught one of their upper level classes. Absolutely loved it. It was one of those things that was this huge departure from the clinical work, where you're working with people who are maybe sick or ill or struggling in some way. And then the other side of this is you got people with their life kind of ahead of them, where they're trying to do good and be good and change, grow and change themselves in a positive way. And so that was super rewarding for me. I loved that, and I was able to kind of dive in, did that for several years, made some good connections, good peers, and then also was able to kind of help, kind of guide a few students too, in the same way that I felt like I had been kind of benefited and blessed when I was in my first year. What that also led for me was I ended up hiring my first employee at that point in time, an assistant, just kind of an office assistant, but it was a student who was interested in the world of clinical work. And what I was able to do is kind of give that person the behind the scenes of what a clinic looks like. What is working with clients? What is talking to clients and all the intricacies of HIPAA and all the other kind of things that you have to kind of keep in mind. I was able to kind of help somebody who was, in undergrad, 20 at the time, really see behind the curtain of a clinical practice. That student graduated, left, I had to say goodbye to my only employee, but she went on to go to get her master's, and now she is her own, she's a practitioner, she's working. And so I felt like I was able to kind of in some way support that direction in her life. And that was extremely rewarding for me. And that's an example for me of kind of how it has to be more than just the clinical work. I have to be able to kind of help in different ways, put energy and put resources into other things. And that really led to kind of that next big venture for me, or one of the next big ventures for me. Right when the pandemic hit, well, no, I should back it up 2 years. 2 years before that, my wife is pregnant. We're expecting our son, and I get tapped on the shoulder, and somebody approached me and said, "Hey, we're going to start a children's museum here in the town that I live. Do you want to be on board? Do you want to join our board and help us?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, that sounds awesome."
Yeah,
sounds like a great way for me to explore and dabble and kind of just help in some way and try to change the landscape where I live. And I told them kind of point blank, when I do something like this, when I commit to somebody else, I'm all in.
All in.
I warned them. I don't know if they believe me, but
right.
It became this huge journey. And so in 2018, I joined the board. Now we flash forward 2025 now. Happy New Year, like we said earlier.
Happy New Year.
So 2025, we're about to open the doors to this children's museum. It's under construction right now, and this spring we're going to open. But it was not a small feat, and it was definitely a huge kind of learning experience for me, but super rewarding. And for me, that's what I was going for this whole time. So I can tell you more about the museum, or if you have a different follow-up question, we can.
No. I mean, see, I'm definitely gonna tap into that, because here it is. You tell me it's 2018. You get tapped on the shoulder about an opportunity to be a board member for a vision. Basically, it's for a vision. I would like to know, how did that relationship come about before we got there? Is this somebody that you were part of your practice? Somebody was in your network? How did that show up?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say someone that was just kind of in my network, was aware of me, understood my background, and I think saw the value of my background. And really, it was a conversation. That was are you interested in this? Do you think you'd find some joy in it? We think you'd help us a lot. And so I joined that founding board as one of those kind of startup people. And then 2 years later, we hired our executive director, And I'll add to that a little bit. That executive director is also my wife, and
Oh,
so it really became like a whole family. We like I said, we're all in.
all in.
Yep. But it was quite the journey, because it started out as a vision. It started out as we were actually had a building donated to us in the downtown area of where we live, and it was perfect. But we really needed to kind of scale up that vision and really make sure that we kind of brought it to a point where we were bringing to the community exactly what was needed and what the community deserved. And that was something that took years to really kind of refine and get that true vision. And during that time, I was also tapped to be the chair of the exhibits committee, and I hold that one super close. I'm honored to have been kind of selected for that. But it was an eye-opening experience. I had never thought about how exhibits are created in museums, let alone children's museums.
Right.
And that was one of those things where, you got to see again that there's a whole world out there that you know nothing about. And so I'm diving into understanding how, this almost this branch of architecture turns into exhibit design, turns into, human experience and how, people actually interact with space, and just mind-blowing. And so I dove in, and that was back in 2020. So pandemic, I had some time. I needed some outlets. I was seeing my clients. I was locked in with my clients, but I also had time. And I was really wanting to make sure I gave it my all. And so we carried that forward. We created the entire vision for the exhibits. We carried that through from just idea to design to all the drawings and construction stuff that was necessary, and now they're in fabrication. They're being created at various kind of places, and they're about to be installed. And so we're at this like huge kind of not turning point, but we're at this huge kind of hallmark moment of being able to say that we accomplished something from vision to actual implementation. And it's huge, and it feels fantastic. And it's a big project. The building we were given was 25,000 square feet. We're expanding it, so it's going to be about 32,000 square feet.
That's a big building. We're talking about a big building, yeah.
Big building. We have 8 major exhibit kind of galleries, areas. The entire kind of budget went from being, this is, maybe going to be an $8 million project, a $10 million project. And then what we ended up raising was $17 million to create exactly what we wanted to create. And so we're doing it. We are creating the second largest children's museum in Minnesota, behind the one that's kind of the hallmark of children's museums in St. Paul, Minnesota.
That is absolutely phenomenal. It's awesome to hear this. So listen, if you're just now joining the show, Health Hustle Chronicles, where the grind meets growth in the world of healthcare. As you know, this ain't your typical podcast, because we bring you the freshest, the livest guests from around the world. From around the world, Craig. And today we've partnered up with Dr. Miles. He also serves his community. He's inspired by his son. He serves as a board member for an emerging children's museum, works tirelessly as the chair of their exhibits committee, overseeing the design, development, and fabrication of the museum's exhibit, and is dedicated to implementing a unique visitor experience that keeps the community, family, and employees central to the experience. Since 2020, the Children's Museum, they've raised over $17 million in capital. They've broken ground, and they're slated to open this year the second largest children's museum in spring of 2025. So it's right around the corner. It's been a passion project for Dr. Miles. It's allowed further redefinement of his overall organization and human-centered skill set. So Dr. Miles, man, this is phenomenal. I want to get into, you said you raised $17 million. And if we look at where we are today, 2025, you started as the board member 2018. Did you know fundraising was going to be a piece of your job?
I think, as joining kind of a nonprofit board, you kind of realize that there is going to be some level of fundraising that you're a part of. It's definitely not my strength, and I don't want to take credit for the 17 million. I'm part of a team, part of a very large team that had fantastic leadership and fantastic direction. But one of the things that I learned along the way is that there's a lot of different ways to support fundraising, a lot of different ways to kind of support the entire team. And you might come at it from the marketing angle, you might come at it from just the ideas of how can we tell this story a little bit better.
Sure.
How can we make sure that we're capturing the essence of the exhibits or anything like that, and then weaving that into this process. And so all of us had a part to play in making sure that we really sold the potential of the museum, and that's something we did really well. And now again, we're knocking on the door to everything opening this spring. The whole space is coming together. They're actually starting to put paint on the walls this week. So it's all happening right now.
Tell me more about this museum, because like if I go up there, which I'm not coming to Minnesota in the winter, so don't get, it's going to be in the summer. So when I come up there this summer and I explore this museum, what should I expect as a parent that's bringing a young child from that standpoint? And then from a children's standpoint, what should they expect?
Yeah. I mean, I think one word to kind of sum it up is wow. One of our goals was to make sure that visitors kind of came in with that wow experience. So even as you arrive at the building, one of the first things you're going to be met with is this huge art installation, this outdoor sculpture that's a larger than life kind of blade of grass, or 3 blades of grass.
Okay.
15 feet tall. So almost immediately you're kind of walking into the space feeling like, holy cow, I'm looking at something that I would never think of as being bigger than me or anything like that. So
right.
First experience, you come into the building, then you start moving into the exhibit spaces, and the next thing you're met with is, I've got 2 favorite exhibits. I'll talk about both of them, but one of them is what we call the climber to the clouds. And so this is a giant kind of net climber that kids can climb in. It's 3 stories tall, 30 feet plus, that you get to climb up vertically and kind of weave your way around and interact with various things. It's themed after weather, so it's like you're climbing into the clouds itself, and then learning about the water cycle, learning about thunder or lightning or wind, or even just kind of atmospheric science in some ways. But the treat to this is, on the other side of this climber is actually a 3-story glassed-in atrium. So as you climb up, it really feels like you are elevating in the city. When you reach the top, you're looking down at some buildings. You're looking down across, parts of our downtown area. And that's a view that kids don't get. And that's one of those where the reward really is not only the challenge of climbing all the way up this thing and navigating it, but then that reward that you get to see something that most people don't get to see. And so that's one thing, if you come, I encourage you, climb, get up there. Adults can go in too.
I would imagine we have a harness or something on us, right? Because it sounds pretty scary going up this high.
It's fully enclosed. So, I mean, it's basically net structures.
Okay.
If you fell from like one hole to the next like platform of netting, it would be like 2 feet. So
okay, got you.
It's safe, and completely enclosed, but you're also looking out over the world at the same time. So it really is kind of a fun experience. The other
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm gonna throw this other exhibit out there because I want to make sure people know about this one. So this one is my personal favorite. This is what we call the headwaters. So if you're from Minnesota, if you're from anywhere in the Midwest, you know the Mississippi River. I got family down in Louisiana. They know that end of the Mississippi River.
Right.
But the Mississippi River starts in Minnesota. And where it starts, it actually starts as just a little trickle. And it's kind of amazing to kind of think about how this thing turns from just this trickle, a little bit of water, a little bit of kind of a lake or kind of small area, into this roaring, mighty river.
Right.
Huge. Yep, exactly. And so the headwaters, this is where it starts. We have an exhibit that actually takes people into this space. The headwaters of the Mississippi, you can kind of see this representation of the river on the floor. But one of the most fantastic things about this space is actually that the building has some history. So it's an old racquetball court, huge space, fully enclosed, no windows. And what this created was an opportunity for us to have 100% light control. So you may think, well, what does that have to do with anything?
Right.
Well, the beauty of it is the people that we kind of gathered together to kind of think about some of the exhibits is they said, hey, we can do a full day-night cycle in this space. We can make it be daytime for 10 minutes, and then we can make the sun set and make it transition to nighttime. So we have this experience where you're up in the North Woods, you're on the headwaters of the Mississippi, and the sun is starting to go down. And what happens is once it gets dark, the whole sky almost just kind of opens up. You get this projection, this realistic projection of the night sky that starts to kind of morph into all of these other things that really captures the imagination. And why this is fantastic to me and why I think this is important is it's important from a storytelling perspective, because one of the areas that we often kind of lose sight of is the history of our lands in some way. So up here in Minnesota, we have a huge Dakota and Ojibwe presence. And so we wanted to actually bring in an Ojibwe and Dakota storyteller. And we actually found somebody who is actually an astrophysicist, does night sky kind of storytelling. So able to create a replication or a representation of the night sky, able to do artwork over the top of it. And we created this really magical experience of just kind of opening up the sky.
So the Big Dipper's up there. You can see the Big Dipper and all that good stuff.
Dipper, you can see Orion's belt, you can see everything.
It sounds like a whole Vegas experience, man. It really sounds pretty live.
It kind of is. Yeah, we're excited about it.
All right, so drop the handles. How do people not only connect with, I guess, how do people explore more, understand more about the museum? You have like a website that's already set in place, maybe some social channels you can drop and help us follow you?
Absolutely. If you want to learn more, the best place to start is the website, greatrivercm.org. Great River CM is our handle across all of our socials. Follow us. We're going to start releasing annual memberships, tickets, announce our opening date in the next couple of months. And so anybody who's following us is really going to have those first dibs in grabbing some of that stuff.
All right, so we definitely check you out there, Doc. So I want to pivot here.
Yeah.
You shared with me that, back in 2018, you became a board member of the museum. You raised $17 million in capital. You fast forward, your wife actually joined you as well on this mission to bring forth this children's museum. So at least the question is, how do you separate your personal life from your professional life? Because there's a lot going on. Not only do you have to go home to your wife, you actually still work with your wife. So I'm anxious to dig into this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's complicated, to say the least. So a couple different pieces to this. I consider my professional life truly my clinical work.
Okay.
And one of the nice things about that is, there's laws, there's different things in place that really protect clients and protect their information. And so it kind of sets up a double-edged sword where I'm not necessarily, I don't talk to my wife about my clients. She doesn't know who my clients are. She doesn't know the background. She doesn't know any of that stuff. The difficulty with that, though, is I also don't have that outlet. I don't really have that ability to talk about work. If I have a difficult day or if I have, a complicated case, it's not like I can just go home or go hang out with some buddies and talk about work. And so as in the private practice world and certainly in the clinical world, this can be difficult. Yeah. In private practice, one of the ways that we try to address this a little bit is we create little groups, little consultation groups where, we have this kind of protected conversation where our goal is never to share anything, identifying about a client. So even those other practitioners don't know who we're talking about. But if there's a specific issue that we're facing or something that, we're trying to wrap our heads around, or even something, traumatic, for us, to have that outlet, that ability to talk to somebody else in a confidential way and kind of say, hey, I need a little bit of help kind of figuring this out, that gives us that outlet. And so my professional life really does stay separate from kind of my home life in some ways. Now, the museum, that adds a whole different layer to this. And that's part of one of the difficulties one of these situations where there is a difficulty. My wife works, tirelessly, putting in all of her energy into the museum. The last thing she wants is me asking a ton of questions as soon as I get home, as soon as she wants a break. And I'm curious, so I always want to know. I want to know things. And so we struggle with that. We've got to find ways to set boundaries. We got to find ways to make sure that we can both unplug and we can both, just be human, be connected in other ways or through other channels. And having a 6-year-old son, that helps. Certainly we can turn all of our attention on him, but it's a difficult kind of walk to make sure that you're not kind of too focused on some of those work areas and making sure that you still have a life, you still have a home life, you still have a social life. And so it's a little bit of kind of the practicing what you preach for me. I tell my clients, you got to have a social life, you got to have hobbies, you got to do things, you got to be able to have fun and laugh and all of these kind of pieces. It can't just be work. But then at home, for me, it's like, well, I'm not working in the clinical sense, but I'm also working because I'm thinking about
Yeah.
And so, it is hard. We've had plenty of conversations about it.
This leads me to the next thing I was going to bring up is like those misconceptions and pitfalls that your industry face. And what you're sharing already is that, okay, you got this workload, and oftentimes when, you're having stressors at work, you just can't talk to anyone, especially having a private practice, about what's going on at work. So you speak in generalities to other people in your profession to kind of help you work through that. But, one of the important things that I know in a healthy relationship is trust. You're a clinical psychologist and you can't share everything. So is trust like one of those pitfalls that psychologists like yourself face? Because now your partner's thinking, man, you're not opening up and sharing with me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think thankfully my wife and I had a really solid foundation of trust long before I ever became, a psychologist and before I jumped into private practice. But it's a really unique situation
Yeah,
to basically walk in the door at home and not be able to talk about work, not be able to vent, not be able to kind of share even successes. And that actually led to part of why I wanted to kind of dabble in other things, why I wanted to teach, why I wanted to engage with the museum is I also, it's lonely to not be able to share anything,
sure.
but it's really lonely to never be able to share when something goes right.
Right.
So when I have those victories, when I have those little, aha moments, when I have those kind of those moments where I'm able to kind of create change in a meaningful way for a client, I can talk to the room that I'm in by myself, and that's about it.
I love this. What other additional like pitfalls or misconception does your practice, not specifically your practice, but being a psychologist that you would normally face?
Yeah, I think the number one misconception, and this is, I fault nobody for it because it's really just not that clear, is the difference between being a psychologist and a psychiatrist. It's one of those big ones. I even get, I probably get a phone call a month of somebody asking, basically, am I a psychiatrist? And the answer is no, I'm not. I'm a psychologist. And the main difference, a psychiatrist is actually a medical doctor. They go to medical school, they complete all of that, and then they specialize, they do a residency in psychiatry. And their main tool is medicine. Their main tool is prescribing. So a psychiatrist is going to be the person who writes you the script for an antidepressant or anxiety medication or antipsychotic or anything like that. That's going to be the psychiatrist. A psychologist like myself, and I'm going to lump together counselors and therapists as well, and we can differentiate those a little bit too, but our main tool is actually diagnosis and then counseling, therapy of some type. And so a lot of what we focus on is getting to the bottom of not only what's going on, how do we truly and accurately diagnose what's going on? This is major depression, or this is just a single episode of something going on. Or maybe this is an adjustment disorder, so you're just struggling with something specific. We get to the bottom of that, we kind of identify what it is, and then we set up a treatment plan and we treat it through counseling. That's the main difference between those two. Now, there are some exceptions to this. There are psychiatrists who do counseling. They're becoming fewer and fewer. So some psychiatrists will sit down with you and give you a 45-minute session. There are in some states also prescribing psychologists where you can do a little bit of extra education at my level and basically gain the ability to prescribe something like an antidepressant.
Okay.
And the main reason for that is there is a shortage in psychiatrists, and there's a huge burden that's put on primary care by having people who could essentially be diagnosed and treated by us. And so some states have kind of bridged that gap just a little bit.
Because you made me think, so there's a shortfall of psychologists, which is interesting. And hopefully this gets out and inspire more people to pursue a similar path or the same path as you. But what's the role in AI in psychiatry? How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think we're seeing it play out in front of our eyes in real time. Some of it is kind of crazy what we're seeing. I think there's a role where I think we have to be a little bit cautious. And, this is where I'm going to give that disclaimer that I am not an attorney. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to even try to pretend any of that. But there are huge liability issues when it comes to having an AI, a bot, a computer, or anything like that treat, diagnose, and kind of handle somebody's life. And so that's where there is kind of this human part that we still need in some ways. That clinical judgment, that ability to kind of follow up in real time, and then also to make sure that something doesn't just simply fail. You don't want your ChatGPT or your AI kind of hallucinating and coming up with some gibberish and telling your person to go do something. We don't need anyone going and drinking bleach or anything like that.
Oh wow, yeah, I know, right?
But that's where we got to be real careful, because AI has that ability to really maybe provide some support for people who maybe fall into that place of being just simply lonely, or simply needing a companion, or needing a little bit of a pick-me-up, a little bit of a push at times. You got this. You can get through grad school. You can face, here's what you could say to your boss to, maybe navigate this negotiation so you feel more confident. There's places for that, absolutely. And some of that is already there, and I'm seeing it pop up every day. I think where we're probably going to be the slowest to truly implement it would be an AI counselor. So I say, I'm feeling really depressed. I go to a website, log on, and that AI basically treats me. Without some type of oversight, I don't know that most licensing boards, state by state, are going to really allow that to be okay. You might get some states that are a little bit more okay with it and maybe allow that. But to really roll anything out like that on a nationwide level, you almost have to get all the states to say, "Oh yeah, this is okay." We're okay
Absolutely.
with it. So
Yeah, that's interesting. You also shared that, for the people that are just listening and they're not looking at the video component of this, is that you're also a Black man, and you talked about growing up and finding your place in the world and then becoming a clinical psychologist. And I will be remiss if I didn't point out the fact that I'm also a Black man. And so two of us together, I would imagine that one of the misconceptions that we have as Black people is that psychology is not for me. It's for everybody else that doesn't look like me, but it's not for me. So how do we break that stigma and get more people to look like us to come in and seek professional help?
yeah, absolutely. And you're hitting the nail on the head with one of those stigmas. There's already kind of an overarching stigma about mental health.
Yeah.
That already exists. And that's been kind of broken down a little bit, and we're seeing some kind of piercing of that, where more people are willing to acknowledge going to counseling, more people are willing to kind of enter that world. But where we're, I think, lagging behind the most are just in general minority populations. Certainly, from my own kind of upbringing and some of my own history, and a lot of Black men that I know, there is kind of this piece where you don't show weakness. There is no situation in which you would be vulnerable to the extent that would be necessary to just even, first of all, call a therapist and say, I want to get on your schedule.
Exactly.
Let alone show up and start talking about things that are difficult in your life. And so I have several clients that I've had to kind of navigate this with a little bit. And one of the things I like to kind of remind them is you're in control. You tell me what you want to tell me. Okay. The other piece to this is I'm not here to judge, So one of the tenets that we have in counseling is what we call unconditional positive regard. Basically what that means is I'm going to meet you where you're at and I'm not going to judge you. I'm going to figure out what's going on for you, and I'm going to see you as a positive person, and the change that you are looking for is something that we can go after. And that helps kind of soften that experience a little bit. It's a little bit different when you walk into a space and somebody's saying, I have the answer and I'm going to fix you.
Exactly.
That's not comfortable. That's not comfortable for most people.
I love that.
Yeah. And so to kind of piggyback on this a little bit too, one of the things that's, abundantly clear to me in kind of the mental health world is we don't have enough Black therapists, period. We also don't have enough male therapists. And when you put those two things together, Black male therapists, I know 2 in the city that I'm in.
Wow.
I went to, even in my grad school kind of cohort, I think we graduated about 70. I'd say there's less than 10, and we were in Chicago. So we are not producing a lot of Black therapists. We're not producing a lot of Black men who can sit with anyone. It's not that only a Black male therapist can work with a Black male. That's just not true.
Right.
But representation really does matter in the medical world. And you'll hear this from anybody, basically, that you interview in the medical world. It works a lot better if people see themselves in the system that they're in. It doesn't necessarily mean that their doctor even has to be Black. But if you walk into a clinic and you at least see, a Black nurse or a Black doctor or, somebody at the front desk who reflects you in some way, that already starts to kind of make you feel a little more welcome and a little safe. But certainly being able to sit down with somebody with the same background or be able to sit down with somebody who's even had similar experiences, that opens up the door for a lot. And so we need more of that. We need more representation in mental health. We need more representation in the medical world as a whole.
I love this. That's so powerful. And I'm hopeful that people gain some insight and knowledge from this podcast once we share this in the airways to help them better understand more about some of the misconceptions and pitfalls, but also the path to becoming a clinical psychologist like yourself. And just thinking that we as people are not actually pursuing this path and we're not getting the representation where so many other cultures are, then it feels like it's setting us back, a couple of steps each and every year that we don't have more people that look like us enter this space. So thank you for sharing that insight on that.
Yeah, no problem.
In your opinion, what's holding people back from achieving their goals?
In a broader sense?
Just in a broader sense.
Yeah, okay. I think maybe 2 things kind of come to my mind. The first one being and this is kind of a complicated piece, but I'm just going to throw this out here.
Okay.
It's your relationship with risk and how comfortable you are with risk. If you don't know how comfortable you are with risk, it's always going to feel scary because you don't know where that line is for you. Some people are definitely way more willing to risk things. They might be the adventurous type that will jump out of planes or gamble all their money away or whatever it is. They have this complete tolerance for risk. But most of us aren't there. Most of us are somewhere in that middle space. And often when there's an opportunity or a challenge or something that's kind of presented to us, even if it's just a goal in our brain, sometimes it feels like it's just across the line of the risk that we're willing to tolerate. And we haven't necessarily put our finger on that yet, but that's often where our brain starts sending up those kind of warning bells saying, don't do it, stay away, don't even start. The other one, and this is kind of a maybe less complicated, I guess maybe just more obvious in some ways, but for people who have aspirations, if it's more of the entrepreneurship side or kind of the business side, and they really want to start something, they want to do something, access to capital, that's a big one.
Yeah.
If you don't have the funding yourself, or you don't know where to go to get the funding, you don't have somebody you can tap that might be able to float you whatever you need for that first period of time. If you don't have that access or that startup capital, it's hard to really make that commitment to jump into business. Now, the counter argument to that, though, is if you have the right kind of help, if you have the right mentorship, if you have the right kind of connection to resources, chances are you can find some capital. You can find some of that and make it happen. Or you can figure out how to do it as lean as possible. How do you start up with that almost kind of that the least necessary, the least kind of smallest idea you can to kind of put out there.
Right. I love this because I think we're saying the same thing, or I'm thinking what you're saying, which is you say the relationship with risk, which for me, I'm thinking, okay, it's your fear tolerance, right? So it gets back to fear. But the way you said it is so powerful because now we're not going with the negative. We're just focusing on more of a positive attribute or segment of that fear, which is just, what is your relationship? What's your comfort zone? And then the other thing you shared is that capital. Those are two huge things, for real. I'm glad you brought those up. Is there anything else? We're good with that.
No, I think we're good with that.
Okay. So I would love to jump in a little bit about your practice and then the impact that you're trying to make. So please expand a little bit about, your practice and the impact that you're trying to make here in 2025 and beyond.
Yeah, definitely. So in my practice, like I said, I've been in private practice now for about 10 years. It really was kind of built under that idea that I wanted to dive in, do some of that clinical work of working with health clients, but then also being able to balance that out a little bit more with just general counseling and general clinical work. So as I enter kind of 2025, this is something that I've been in the back of my head kind of working on slowly and kind of trying to kind of bring out a little bit, is that I've also had a lot of experience working now with business owners, working with small businesses, working with nonprofits, working with museums. And I fit really well in that area where I can apply a lot of what I know about human behavior, what I know about psychology, how I kind of process the world a little bit. And one underlying secret about a lot of psychologists is that we're also tremendous problem solvers. We like to get to the bottom of whatever's going on. We like to solve that problem. But applying that then to areas that are non-clinical. And so what I did about a year ago, and then kind of more publicly just now, I started launching a consulting arm of my business. So I have human factor leadership. And really, this whole venture that I'm in is not meant to replace my clinical work. I will still do my clinical work. I love what I do, helping people and kind of creating that change. But it's also limiting to work under that umbrella of being a psychologist, as a licensed psychologist, because everything I do then has to fit the rules of the license, basically.
Right.
I'm overseen by the board of psychology in the state that I'm in, and there's that concern that if I'm not doing things right, or I'm not if I'm not applying the right principle as seen by clinical psychology, then I'm not working under my license. Gotcha. And so I said to myself, I need to really create something that allows me to work aside from my license, outside of those bounds, but to work with businesses and work with leaders, to work with aspiring leaders, young people who might be kind of interested in kind of figuring out how do I level up these ranks a little bit, or how do I make that jump into starting my own small business, or how do I become a stronger manager or leader or person who can someday maybe be that CEO, and being able to say, this isn't clinical anymore. What this is about how do I manage my relationship in the workforce, in the corporate world? How do I understand myself, my own motivations, my own drives? So there's a part of me that really wants to work a little bit more in kind of leadership and leadership training. The other part to this too is I have a great knack for working with small businesses and working with not even just small businesses and nonprofits, both of them. The unique challenges that face nonprofits might be their boards themselves. How do they structure their board? How does their board function? How do they talk? How do they communicate? Well, I don't want to look at that through the clinical lens. I want to look at that through how do I organize this a little bit better? How do I make them a stronger business? How do I make them a stronger board? And so human factor leadership really does have that aim as well. Strengthening businesses, strengthening boards, strengthening leaders.
I love this. And the reason why I love this is because I oftentimes think, and I watch a lot of shows like many of us, right? We got all of our streaming channels, but I like kind of like the psychological thrillers and I like the motivational shows and things like that. And I often think that many times we miss out on great leadership from people that, that are in the ranks because mentally they're struggling with a barrier that they can't get past. And if we're able to help them get past that barrier, imagine the type of leaders that we can bring forth to the world. And from what I understand from the human factor that you're expanding out is not only individuals, businesses, board members, where we can tap into that and help the next generation of leaders find their voice, find their talents, and be able to scale and elevate within various leadership roles as well. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yes, you are. Absolutely.
That is absolutely phenomenal. So please help me with some advice here, okay? Mm-hmm. Individuals listening to this, they're watching this, and they're thinking, you know what, Dr. Miles, that's pretty impressive that, what he's been able to accomplish in a short time, board member, his own practice, been in industry for quite some time, adjunct professor. I mean, you're doing it all, man. You're like the beacon of what a clinical psychologist would look like in my mind. So professionals, help us that are interested in following a similar journey. Like, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think part of it is, for me, one of the guideposts is authenticity. Find what works for you. What are you really passionate about?
Yeah.
What excites you? And for me, it is that ability to kind of balance out this idea that I have a clinical world and I have something else. And so for the last several years, I've been just trying to find that something else, or at least nurture that something else. And so when you find those outlets, or when you're kind of true to yourself and you're saying, I need that other thing, it starts to open up other doors for you. And the other kind of beautiful piece about it is it actually gives me energy back into my clinical work. I'm not burning myself out in just the clinical work. I'm showing up for my clients. I'm showing up in a way that allows me to be the best version of the therapist that I am. The other thing I see for a lot of people kind of get in the way, there's one of those catch-all kind of phrases that's kind of growing all the time right now is that idea of kind of that imposter syndrome.
Yeah, that's big, right?
And it's a real thing. It exists. I think it exists on different levels for different people, though. And one of the things that, even I myself kind of dealt with coming out of grad school, brand new psychologist, just got my doctorate and working on licensure and even getting licensed, there was almost this belief that I had to be a certain thing. Like there was this archetype of what a psychologist was.
Right.
And that's one of those pieces that I don't know if, maybe grad schools are getting a little bit better at it, but that's one of those areas I didn't feel like they did the best job of kind of training me to truly kind of trust me and trust kind of my own insights, instincts, and truly bring myself to the table. Because often what I found myself doing was kind of going through these motions of, okay, this is what I would do next. This is what the psychologist would say. Am I sitting the right way? Am I positioning myself? Like my brain would always be in those spaces. And it wasn't until I was maybe about 3-4 years in that I kind of started to say, you know what? I'm better off just showing up as me. I'm better off taking all of the knowledge and skills that I have, but applying them through me. And what it ended up doing for me is I truly created better connections with my clients. And some clients I can work well with and some I don't. And so those clients would move on or I'd refer them somewhere else. But the person that showed up, I think, was much, much more authentic to the individual that I was working with and gave me a lot more confidence. Rather than feeling like I was playing a role, I was playing me. I was doing something that was comfortable for myself. So really being okay with that idea that you can do it your way. You can show up. You can be yourself. It may have some consequences in some situations, but chances are it's not going to be, devastating.
Exactly. So what I picked up on out of that, and I'm just going to repeat it, is that you've diversified your energy to allow yourself to really give 100% in that area when you're focused on that area. Because what I'm picking up on is if you were just focused on one area, you felt like there was going to be more burnout, but you've got multiple different things that allows you to focus. So when you come back to your main core piece of psychology, you're not burnt out because now I have other areas of interest that that complement my core practice as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes me a more well-rounded individual. And yeah, I agree. When I got like a 9 a.m., 10 a.m., Monday morning client that I know I'm going to see, I get to kind of come into that just excited. There's a lot of great clients that I get to see, and I thank all of my clients. Who knows if any of them will watch, but I thank them because they're a part of me too. They're a part of my story.
All right, so I'm gonna ask you this question because we're getting ready to wrap up here, and I'm not sure if you have an answer for this because it sounds like you're already doing so much. You don't have any additional time, but outside of work, being a board member, being a junk professional, a national speaker in circuits, and just an all-around hustler, man. Is there anything that you like to talk about outside of those interests?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot. That's a lot of my focus. Yep, it's a lot of my focus right now, and a lot of my energy really is going into kind of human factor leadership and kind of getting that going, getting that off the ground. So I do spend a lot of time, trying to refine and trying to kind of work on that. The other thing I spend a lot of time dabbling with, and this does kind of intersect with maybe a lot of not only my clinical work, but also my the museum stuff, is I love technology. I love learning about technology. I love dabbling with that, figuring out what works, what doesn't work, how I can apply it in different ways. So when AI really started to hit the scene, it was like, how do I figure out if that's useful for me? Well, the only way to do that is get hands-on, try it out, experiment. And then I like teaching other people that stuff too. So I'll share some of what I learned with clients, or take it home, talk to my wife about something that I was trying out, or at the museum, maybe I was like, okay, now that I have access to ChatGPT, I can code.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Learn. So I was like, okay, well, let me go get a Raspberry Pi. Let me see if I can code this to do this one specific thing, and then voila, I've got half of an exhibit component that I've just made. Well, that was all through just dabbling and playing around and having fun with it. And honestly, I think that's one of the greatest gifts that the Children's Museum has kind of provided for me, is it kind of brings out a little bit of that child, kind of that inner child kind of playground. It's that ability to say, let's tinker, let's play, let's figure out, let's experiment, let's just see what happens, but let's do it in a way that could be fun. And that really is something that my friends, they'll hear me talk about that. They'll hear me say, this is what I got to do today with the museum. This is what we're doing for the exhibits. And they're tired of it, but that's okay.
This episode was so impactful, so powerful. I would love for you to share, how do people get in contact with you? I mean, and I'm sure there's going to be multiple different ways, but please drop those.
Yeah, definitely. Best way, I'm kind of old school when it comes to like email. I'm certainly on socials, but visit my website. I've got a new website up right now, factorleadership.com. And that's my human factor leadership page. So factorleadership.com, brand new, it's up there. Check it out. My contact information is right on there. Connect with me. Let me know if you have any questions. Let me know, even if you just want to bounce something off me. I'm willing to shoot an email back. I'm not going to charge you for an email, but it is one of those where I like to kind of stimulate that type of conversation because it helps me grow too. So reach out to me. That'd be my suggestion. And that's the best way to kind of see what I'm doing. Visit the museum website as well. See everything we're doing there. So that was greatrivercm.org. And then, Patrick, I did warn you. I was going to turn the tables on you a little bit.
Oh, what you got for me? What you got?
Yep. So as the psychologist, I'm used to asking the questions. I'm used to kind of throwing stuff out there. So I wanted to think of like a good question that maybe could get people knowing you a little bit better. So anyone who's listening to these podcasts, they can figure out if they're going to listen to that next episode, they're going to keep following you. So 2 questions for you. The first one really is about healthcare. I mean, you've kind of shaped your entire podcast around this idea of healthcare. So what is it about healthcare? What is it about the healthcare world that really interested you?
That's an excellent question. Thank you for asking that, Doc. For me, I spent the last 15 years in healthcare, and I kind of stumbled on healthcare after I felt like 2 or 3 other careers before I found healthcare. So if we go backwards, after I graduated high school, I joined the military. I spent 6 years in the Army. I was a helicopter mechanic, had an amazing opportunity to, develop my craft, but also see the world in other countries. So that kind of inspired me and instilled this, that, like, even though we suffer here in the United States, there's people that suffer just as much in other countries, right? And so as I found healthcare, I realized that I was scaling this ladder as this young executive. And I kept on looking around and I kept on seeing people that looked like me not achieve a level of success that I had already achieved. And they just seemed so uninspired. And I was like, well, people that find healthcare, they find healthcare for a couple of different reasons. One is that intrinsically, they want to help other people, right? Whether it looks like them or not, they just want to help other people. So they navigate to some form of healthcare. And as you and I know, healthcare doesn't necessarily have to be at the bedside. You don't have to be a nurse, but there's technology piece, there's the pharmacist piece. There's so many different pieces of healthcare that we can expand on. So for me, near and dear to my heart, and then, as we all had issues during COVID, my mom passed away during COVID. And that just kind of reset everything for me to make me realize that life truly is short. What kind of impact am I making, not only for myself, but for my family? So I was like, let me expand within healthcare. It's a niche, even though it's a wide base of people that we can impact, but it's a niche for me. So I want to help tell the stories, spotlight leaders like yourself, people that are making a difference, help people see themselves, kind of like what you said, that representation, see themselves in other people where they can keep pushing forward to keep expanding and move forward. So that's why healthcare is my niche, and those are the impact that I'm having.
That's excellent. I appreciate that backstory a little bit. It's helpful, and there's so much truth there, which I think really it sets the tone for what you're doing, because these stories are impactful when you're able to kind of dig in and spotlight something like this. Okay, last question for you, and this is kind of that home run question. If you could go back and visit your 25-year-old self, go back in the Wayback Machine and go visit 25-year-old Patrick, what advice would you give?
Oh, honestly, I'll probably say nothing at this point. And I'm going to say the reason why I'm going to say nothing is because I feel like every experience that I had shaped me to become the person that I am today. And without those experiences, who knows who I would have been, right? So I wouldn't tell that person anything. He needs to figure that out himself. But one of the things that I would want to share with people that are in their 20s, in their 30s, go ahead and get a coach, go get a mentor, find those individuals that you look up to, that you would like to be like, that you're trying to emulate, and bend their ear, ask for some time to put on their schedule, get to really understand their hustler's journey. Because oftentimes what's going to happen is you're going to face similar setbacks and challenges that they face. We're not immune to the worlds of life, right? And if you're able to connect with those people, it may make your journey just that little bit easier. So that's the advice that I would give other people in their 20s. But for me, I'm going to go back and do it again. And hopefully I ended up being this guy. Nice.
Excellent. I'm happy to hear that. Good. Listen, well, I appreciate letting me take over that microphone for a second.
This has been another episode of Health Hustle Chronicles, where the grind meets the growth in the world of healthcare. As you know, it's not your typical podcast, because I bring you the freshest, the livest guests from around the world, Craig. And today we had an opportunity to connect with Dr. Vincent Miles. He's a licensed clinical psychologist in private practice with over 2 decades of experience in clinical, business, and professional settings. He owns and operates his mental health clinic, Miles Psychology Services, and is now launching a consulting arm of his professional practice, focusing on the needs of businesses and young leaders. Human Factor Leadership. It aims to help close an observed gap in workforce-ready leadership, assist businesses in strengthening strategy, and helping cross-sector collaborative efforts. Human Factor Leadership also has a stated goal to assist in improving diversity and opportunity within both nonprofit and for-profit organizations, bringing science, effective methods, and human behavior to the forefront of business design. Human Factor Leadership is a leader in understanding the human factor and all that you do, all that you can be, and the businesses that you lead. So until the next time, keep grinding, keep hustling. See you on the end.